How have you been?
Um, Hanging in there. Yeah, good. Yeah, how are you feeling?
Good. I'm good.
Yeah, you
Well,
look great. Yeah.
a little bit, I've gotten a little bit overwhelmed because I started this hot flash thing. I talked to you in 2020, right? That was a
I
long
think
time,
that's
year and a
right.
half ago, probably.
Yeah, yeah.
You were the first person I interviewed, and I had no mechanism for your interview. So always feel bad about that. I just got
Oh
super,
no, it's all right.
I get excited. I'm like, I want to interview. And then, I thought, well, I don't really have anywhere to put it. So I wrote it for my newsletter. But yeah, since then, Hot Flash is sort of, I started it and then I've just continued devoting my time to it. And now it's a thing. So
It's
now,
totally a thing. I mean, I think it's really wonderful. I was like completely thrilled with your interview with the doctor um who talks about eating the soybean study, and I'm
yeah.
going to start a 21-day regimen of like no animal products and like I just thought that conversation was terrific. I mean, there's so many episodes that it's just great. I mean, when I give a lecture to anyone who's interested in sort of the menopause piece, I always talk about your work and your podcast and how I feel like you've been on the vanguard of like this menopause moment, right? And I just think, I mean, I also love like your spirit of inquiry. It's like, I'm not here to show for anybody. I just want facts. Like, why is it so hard that we can't just get facts, right? I think it's great. I think you're doing
Oh,
great work.
thanks. All that time interviewing people about sheep shows and gunshot wounds when I was a reporter, I've just like tunneled it into menopause. But
That's
thank you
great.
for giving me a shout out. That's great. And I am curious, like we'll just, we'll go back to the beginning, but I'm so curious in the year and a half when you talk about this menopause moment. I think it was kind of happening when we spoke in 2020, but it's really exploded since then. Like where do you see it from your perch?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like, in 2019, and I actually just used this image in a lecture yesterday, so I can actually pull up the actual article. In 20, where are we? Where is that? Here it is. In June of 2019, there was that article in the New Yorker, Where Are All the Books About Menopause? Do you remember
Yes.
that?
Yep.
By Sarah Mancuso, right? And then I look and I was like, well, all those books were in the pipeline because they were about to come out. Because then if you look at the books that came out after that, the Menopause Manifesto, I believe, time-wise was right after What Fresh Hell Is This? Like there's just a whole bunch of books that came out right after that. And it was like, it was like call and response, like, where are these books? Here they are,
Yeah.
and I'm just so thrilled to have been a part of that,
Oh, yeah.
that this book was a part of that. Yeah.
So Menopause, a comic treatment. You edited this anthology. It's won the Eisner Award for best comic, and Mimi Pond won for
Yeah.
what is it? It's the when the Menopause Carnival comes to town. It's awesome.
Yeah, which is just terrific, which was a last second find. I was the book was about to go to press and I saw it and I just went nuts. And I was like, Mimi, please, can we somehow figure out how to get this in the book? And you'll notice that the pages are the pages are not quite formatted exactly because it was originally a web comic, but we just made it work. Yeah.
Okay, so just first of all, tell me how it came about. Because it coincides with like all of us are working in this, doing stuff in this space because we're having these experiences. But just, how did it come about in the first place?
Yeah. So for me, it was about just, yeah, starting to experience all these changes and timing wise, and I think this might not be completely unusual, it also coincided with, you know, a lot of grief, right? Like it's the time also where we start losing our parents or dealing with all of the caregiving of our parents. And my mother and my aunt, who I was responsible for and spending a lot of my energy over the previous 10 years caring for, had just died. And then all of a sudden I just started having these hot flashes and fatigue and swelling in my feet and all these crazy symptoms. And I couldn't really separate, like, is this somehow grief or is this something else? And I'm sitting here thinking, like, I'm a nurse, I should know these answers. And I realized that I didn't. And so I had been working in the space of comics around health for already almost 10 years. And it really, making a comic is how, or turning to comics in popular culture is kind of how I process information. And so I kind of came to comics with this question of like, well, there must be something in comic form out there about menopause, right? And there must be a cool collection of cool comics. And I was looking for what I actually ended up doing, because I wanted it as a resource. But it turned out the only thing I could find was this collection that was done in 1950 by Nora Preddy, called Mini Pauses. And it was about 24 single panel comics that were so insulting. They were, the example I keep using is this one where a man is standing at the door with his hat in his hand, and he says, buckets of tears, buckets of tears. That's all you do is cry. I'm leaving. I'm going home to mother. And she's there literally with buckets in front of her and crying. And it's just like so insulting to women. Like, it makes them that, it's their individual problem. Women experiencing menopause are an enormous inconvenience to mostly the men in their life. And if other women appear in the comics, these one of these 24, they're usually, it's a couple of women who look perfectly happy and well put together, and one woman who looks sort of disheveled, who seems upset or experiencing a symptom. And the other women are saying, well, it's your own fault. You haven't gotten your surgery, or you aren't taking your pills, or you aren't, like, there's this blaming. So it's like women turning against women. And I just thought, oh my God, seriously, we have got to do better. And so I pitched this to, I had already worked with this publisher for my previous book. And I pitched this, like, you know what? And absolutely, it was falling on ears that were listening. And then I put out the call to cartoonists that I knew who had experienced this or would probably have some really interesting perspective. And so that's how the collection was originally born.
So tell us what sort of range of pieces you found or collected.
Yeah, that was really important. Yeah, that was really important to me to recognize the diversity of voices in this area, right? Because especially like the example that book I just described, Mini Pauses, is like white heterosexual woman of that exact age frame in a very particular body style. And I just thought, those are all the myths I want to explode, right? I want to talk about, like, I happen to have a good friend who's a trans man, and I know he's experienced symptoms of perimenopause as part of the transition process. So I wanted that, and is also a great cartoonist, and I wanted Casey's voice in there. I wanted to make sure that the collection was as diverse as possible from as many perspectives as possible. So yeah, body shape, sort of like cultural perspectives that they might bring to it, or even religious perspectives that they might bring to it. Even the range of people who, so there are people there, who have been making comics for the better part of 50 years. And there's a cartoonist in there who it's their first comic ever. And I wanted that range of stylistic approaches as well, and expertise, to kind of speak to the fact that this is something we can all do if we try. So yeah, it was very important, particularly around issues of gender identity and sexuality, that I wanted diverse voices, and I feel like we accomplished that.
There seems to be, I don't know whether you see this too, but it seems to be an emergence that this time is also tied to people asking questions about those things that maybe they weren't able to ask prior in their life. So there's people early on who asked gender questions and questions about their sexuality, but I'm seeing a lot about women our age who are questioning now their sexuality, like, and who are questioning their gender in like sort of like a new opportunity. Do you know at all what I'm talking about? Like, are you seeing that?
Yeah, well, sadly, I see that on TikTok, right? Like, there's this joke because I'm on lesbian TikTok, right? And there's this joke on lesbian TikTok of like, that there's these, and I actually just heard a story yesterday of people watching TikTok going, oh my, am I straight? Like, like all these great, like really just gorgeous butch women. But anyway, that's another
That's funny.
side.
I gotta follow lesbian TikTok.
But what it brings to mind to me is actually my own comic in the collection, because and if this is tied to that, because my comic in the collection, I was really curious about when I get a hot flash in the middle of the night, and this has continued to happen. I am wide awake, and I kept thinking about something that this cartoonist Linda Berry once said to me, of like, nothing happens, that, evolution keeps things with us for a reason. And I kept thinking, like, what is the evolutionary reason for hot flashes, right? Like, this could have been an extinguished thing. Like, this could have just gone away, but it doesn't, right? So I talked to a neurobiologist, and I kind of convey that in the comic, and she talks about the neurobiology of why we have hot flashes and why we might need to be awake for that. But I just felt unsatisfied with sort of biological explanation. So in my comic, what I talk about is the fact that hot flashes are give a shits burning off, and we have to be awake to hear it, right? And that there's like these, and this gets to your point, in that women on the other side are, people who have gone through menopause on the other side often say, like, I just don't give a shit about all the stuff I used to care about, right? And I think about living within the boundaries of gender as society has defined it, or sexual attraction as it has been sort of prescribed upon someone, and that they are living within those boundaries, that perhaps that might be a give a shit that burned off, and I'm like, I'm going to explore other options, right? Or explore just any way of being in the world that I want to make mine now, because I don't give a shit what anyone thinks of me.
Right. And if you grew up and you were very rigid at that way, I mean, I just even find, first of all, I find myself giving less of a shit in ways I'm almost feeling or might be dangerous, like I'm getting, yeah, you still have to function in society, but it's like, but yeah, I find that I grew up in a very normal, like sort of straight and narrow way. And yeah, like I just am like, well, maybe I'm not maybe I don't like she, maybe I'm not she today. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what, I don't know. Like, I know we learned about that spectrum of sexuality in psychology. I always remember, and I've always said to people, it's like straight and lesbian, and like I'm screwing it up. You know what I mean? No one's on either end.
Yeah.
Barely anyone's
Right.
in the middle.
Sure.
And I've always remembered that all my life. And I'm like, and talking about it with my friends. It's just it's a kind of a magical time of life, except for all the not feeling well and the,
Yeah, all the crummy stuff. But yeah, I always think about Eddie Izzard, who now actually goes by she. But in the past, Eddie Izzard always talked about, like, in terms of clothing, right? And gender expression in how we present ourselves. Eddie Izzard always talked about, like, I just look at my closet and think, do I want to be in boy mode or girl mode today? And that always resonated with me. Like, how do I boy mode, girl mode? And not that it's a binary either, right? Like, it could be anywhere in between, but I always thought that was so liberating. Like, oh yeah, you can dress any way you want, right?
Exactly. And there's a lot of pressure to sort of put you into, and I find it, maybe I bristle a little bit when it's like white cisgendered women, straight women, right? Because I'm like, I don't know, like, you look at me and you think that, but you don't really know what's going on inside of me. And so I'm not complaining. I'm just saying, like, I don't know. I'm not quite sure what might end up happening.
And it's also like, maybe one day I want to break out of that and be creative in a different, like, maybe it's a realm of creativity that I could embrace, right? In terms of presentation, right?
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying that that's what people who have other gender identities are doing. I'm not saying that at all. No. I'm saying that there's the freedom for all of us to decide how we present ourselves, and yeah.
Yeah, and all the serious issues that people face when they go through those transitions, but it has, like any movement, created freedom for everyone to sort of like explore and be more free. And those people that go through the hardship of being the first people to introduce society to it pave the way, and then everyone else can be like, I don't know what I think, How about when it comes to symptoms, just you personally, how are you doing? Because I know the hot flashes were a big concern. How about what other things are you experiencing?
It feels like some of the other things have receded. Like, so it's been over a year since I've had a period, so I'm on that other side. And I feel like a lot of the earlier other symptoms have receded a little bit. Like, I remember I had a lot of trouble with, like, my feet were all puffy and it would hurt to walk first thing in the morning, right? Like, getting out, and so that feels a lot past. A lot of the emotional swings feel past. And so the hot flashes are still coming strong. And I'm eager to try something I heard about on your podcast, this 21-day thing of trying vegan with soybeans, with the half a cup of soybeans every day. And we ordered up the, not edamame, like, go back and listen to that episode. It's terrific. And I thought that was really interesting and worth a try. Like, it's only going to help me, right? because I have been diagnosed with high blood pressure and I've got to keep an eye on my cholesterol. So doing all of that will help that. And I thought, why not? It's worth a try. So I'm hoping that that might help with the hot flashes as well, but because that seems like the one thing I'm sort of left with. And it's just crazy.
How often do you have hot flashes?
Like I'd say every couple hours. So during the night, like, I mean, the funny thing is I am reliably awake. I am so reliably awake at 4 o'clock in the morning because of a hot flash coming on, that I actually take my blood pressure medicine at that time. Cause because then I think, well, by the time I wake up, it's kicked in. Right.
Right.
And we have a neighbor that leaves for work at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, the other day I was like, hey, is it you that leaves at 4 a.m.? She's like, why would you know that?
Always awake.
Because I'm up. I hear it.
I find those night ones so weird because it's literally like someone kicks me and like jolts me awake. Like it's literally like, and then the hot flash descends. And it's so neurological, right? It's not, I feel like the name hot flash just makes it seem like, oh, you get hot, but it is this whole event in your body.
Yeah, it's just so amazing to me because if you think about any other time, someone coming to, this is the part that's so fascinating to me. Any other time someone coming, waking you up during the night, you'd wake up groggy, you'd be like, what's going on? Where am I? When it's the hot flash, it's I'm alert, I'm awake, I am cognitively so clear. I know exactly where I am, what time it is. Like, oh, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. It's a hot flash. I could literally get up and start doing things. I'm that awake. And it'll go back to where if I did do that at 3 a.m., I would be like, okay, now I'm fading again. But it's amazing to me because I'm always groggy and cranky if I get woken up during the night. But that's what's so fascinating is, yeah, the neurology of it. Yeah.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about becoming you're an RN and you're a cartoonist. So how did you create Comic Nurse and how did that intersect with the graphic medicine movement? And what is it? Because I don't think people know.
Yeah. So I was working as a nurse during our last, global public health crisis, the AIDS crisis. And I was fresh out of nursing school. And my original degree was not in nursing. My first undergraduate degree is in philosophy and English. And so then I couldn't really figure out what to do with that. And I'd always sort of wanted a place in the arts, but I didn't like writing, even though I thought I was going to be a writer. I realized I actually hate writing. I like having written, but not like actually writing. Yeah. I can't make it. It's like, that's not a job. Like, oh, a brilliant writer. Like, that it is a job, I suppose, but it's way harder than I ever had the fortitude for. So I went and I thought, well, my mom was a nurse and I literally was raised to be a nurse. I was doing hospital corners at 4, and my father had massive strokes. And so we were actually his caregivers. And my mom literally had taught me all this practical nursing stuff. And I thought, oh my God, I stopped resisting it. And I just like, okay, great. I'll go to nursing school. My mother was thrilled. And so I went to nursing school because one of my thoughts was that, I'll be around like the most important events we experience in some ways in life, right? Birth, struggling with our mortality, dying, and just like I'll be around these events that hopefully will somehow inspire me. And also I know I'd be good at it and I wanted to help people. And so I thought, let's just meet. It's just like, rings all the bells. So I decided to go to nursing school and I did. And then I came out of nursing school and my father died kind of unexpectedly, even though he'd had all these strokes. And then I thought, oh my God, what was I thinking? Why did I go to nursing school? I don't want to do this. I took care of my father for all these years. Like, what was I thinking? So I had this nursing instructor, and I tell this story in my book, Taking Turns. I had this nursing instructor because I literally walked up during my first day of clinical, which was a week after he died. And I said, hi, yeah, listen, I just realized I need to quit. And she sent me home and she's like, all right, look, your father just died. You go home, take the rest of the day off, come back tomorrow and I'll figure something out. And what she'd figured out was she said, I'm going to give you a private clinical on the AIDS unit, and you're going to have patients that are just, so different than your dad. They're going to be much younger. They're going to be, in it's a different situation than he was in. It's not going to remind you of him, and you're going to learn everything you need to know through being an AIDS nurse to be a great nurse. And I said, okay. So I did that. And I was instantly like, this is my calling. Like, in a sense of, oh, absolutely. This is my community. This is my calling. This is what I want to do. So I finished that and then went straight into AIDS care. As I went straight into AIDS care and came out and got a job on this AIDS unit in Chicago that my book is ultimately, Taking Turns, is ultimately about, I realized like, oh my God, how do I deal with this? And unfortunately, I think there's probably a lot of nurses who are feeling the same thing. They don't teach you in nursing school how to process what you bear witness to as a nurse, or even as a doctor and as a healthcare provider, right? Like we see so much trauma, and particularly during a time of mass death like we're in now, and unfortunately, and we were in then. You see, people you get so connected to, seeing them suffer, and like, what do you do with that? You can't constantly go home and tell your loved ones, because then you're taking your secondary trauma and turning it into tertiary trauma. That's just too hard. So there's no place for it to go, and if it doesn't go anywhere, it stays inside, and that gets real yucky in there too. So I literally sat down with paper and I would write. And then I realized, like, no, that's too hard. I can't keep telling these stories again. It's bad enough I'm living them once and then I'm going to go home in my free time and be writing this in a journal. So words weren't working. And then I would try to paint like memorial screens, stuff that I felt like that didn't tell the whole story. And then one day I literally sat down and just drew this picture of myself, like out of desperation. Like, I've got to find a way to process this stuff so I can go to work and not be caught up in my own grief. And I just drew this picture and I wrote a few words over it and I put a box around it. And I was like, oh, it's a comic, right? So I put another box and I kept going, this combination of image and text, image and text. And I found by 9 panels later, like, it worked. Like, I felt like I had processed that experience, right? Like it had found a place outside of me on the page where it could live and I could walk away. And I was blown away, and I just kept doing it. So to answer your question, then how did that get to kind of becoming a field? So when our unit closed around 2000, and I realized, like, oh, I don't need to do this anymore. What's next for me? Like, how do I reinvent myself as a nurse? And I realized, like, I really love this comic thing, and I think I have found that voice I wanted in the arts. And I decided that I wanted to make comics I wanted to inform my comics with theory around story. And why does story help us heal? Why is it that when something happens with our health and our bodies, even like if you think about what you're experiencing with menopause, we want to tell a story about it. We want someone to listen to our story. People who listen to stories are listening and processing information. And why can story heal almost sometimes as well as any other intervention that we do? And I wanted theory, and there's a great field called narrative medicine. There are theorists who have talked about the role that stories have in healthcare, the kinds of stories we tell about. They've sort of, created a taxonomy of the kinds of stories that we tell. And then, there's a lot of great work in psychology and psychiatry around, like, are the stories we're telling helping us or holding us back? Right? How could we reconstruct the narrative that we're telling to more serve our life goals? Right? This is what we do in therapy, right? So I wanted all that theory in my comics, not all that, and not that I gained it all, but I wanted to bring in some of that, because I knew that I was going to keep making comics about this AIDS unit and that experience. Fast forward to when I'm finishing that but the thing was, in grad school, like, so I'm studying medical humanities and bioethics, which now is more broadly sometimes called health humanities. And I didn't kind of have it on the forefront that I'm really only doing all of this so I can make better comics. I was like, no, I want to be taken seriously as a scholar, right? Because I couldn't talk about comics. But towards the end of my degree, I found this book called Mom's Cancer by Brian Fees. And it's this amazing book that's like by an adult, aimed at adults, about what the experience of having his mom have cancer, and showed this perspective from a son's, perspective from the family. And it just felt like a window into a whole world that I thought could be really beneficial to healthcare providers. It really affirmed all that he said about making comics, affirmed what I had experienced of, like, it worked to do this work. And so in researching that book, I came across this guy in England who had just coined this term graphic medicine, because he was sort of doing some similar exploration, and, the internet was fairly new then. So he set up this website. And a bunch of us started getting together and saying, like, we think comics should be taken seriously within the discourse of health and illness and caregiving and disability. And it's just exploded since then. It's now an international movement with annual conferences. We have a website, graphicmedicine.org, and a sister website in Spanish, Medicina Grafica, that has a whole movement going on in Spanish-speaking countries. There's a lot going on in Japan, of course, which has their own tradition of using comics in healthcare. So it's just blown away, and it's my full-time work, and it has been since the day I came across that book, basically, that reaffirmed, like, yes, this is a thing. And I teach at Northwestern Medical School, I teach at the University of Chicago, I teach throughout the country and throughout the world. I've traveled like so many places in the world because of having one day sat down to make a comic to help me survive. Like, it's craziness.
So how does that help? Can you just practically, I don't want to miss the point, but like helping patients, how does it help other, like, how do you explain this to people, how it can help them? You explained very well, like how it helped you process that trauma, but help it from
it's similar, right? So in healthcare, one of the ways we use comics are as an educational intervention, right? So imagine like you go to the doctor and they give you discharge instructions, or you go to the hospital or the emergency room and they send you away with, or even you pick up a prescription and all that paperwork you get with it, or when you go to have a procedure done, you sign a consent. Have you read that consent? No, because it's a giant block of text. You're under stress, you're freaked out, and you can't read giant blocks of tiny text in those cases. So there's ways in which we're trying to integrate something like a comic, which breaks things down in sequential form. And it's so much easier to process, particularly when you're under stress. And so like, that's one of the ways as a patient education intervention, like, why are we pretending like people are reading these things? And then, as healthcare providers, we call them non-compliant if they don't follow their directions, that we've shouted at them, and thrown this text at them. And it's so unjust. And so comics can be a great intervention in that way. So that's the sort of reading comics. But the other side of the coin is that the actual making of a comic, for all the reasons I explained in my long story, is incredibly helpful and therapeutic, because I am convinced, as it worked for me, that when you start in the top left part of the page and you slowly make boxes and proceed with a little bit of image and a little bit of text, you will end up in a different place. And because it's neurology, you're using different parts of your brain when you use image and when you use text, and you put them together, you can in some ways literally be using more of your brain and making connections that you hadn't before. So I take advantage of this when I teach patient groups, or when I teach my medical students or whatever. I'll just say, like, draw a clinical encounter. Just draw a situation in which you were in as a healthcare, either on either side of the stethoscope, right, as the provider or as the patient, and just drawing the room, or think about another situation that has to do with your experiences in healthcare. Draw the room that it happened in, and you in the room with whoever was there. Just doing that totally like makes you think in new and different ways about that experience. Like, oh, I didn't realize that the computer was between me and the doctor, and that was the issue. Or the doctor really was looking more at their paper than at me, like, because you have to draw them doing it, right? And by the way, I'd like to just stop to say for a second, the most basic visual language gets this done. Most of my students and the people I work with use stick figures. That's all it takes, right? You don't have to understand 3D perspective, nothing. In fact, it's really interesting to see. I love like native drawing, people who haven't drawn since they were in 5th grade and they start doing this work. Those are the most amazing drawings, because you realize it's all still there, right? And I often, like, I'll distribute crayons, especially when I work with adults, because it takes us back to that place when we were kids and we had confidence and faith and believed in the power of our drawings. That's all beaten out of us, right, eventually, but we can go right back there in a heartbeat by picking up a crayon and a piece of paper. So in particularly around, and there's, again, all of what I'm saying has begun to have research backing it up, but again, like I told in my story, there's something really powerful to giving something that's living in your head or in your body a place outside of it to go. And particularly around people who have experienced trauma, like sexual trauma, war trauma, making a comic about traumatic experiences actually not only gives a place outside of you to go, but it also gives you agency over something over which you didn't have any agency, something that happened to you, right? So you suddenly get to make all the decisions about what happens in this comic, right? I decide what's shown, what's not shown. I decide the colors, I decide the order, I decide what the agents look like. I could make them look like blobs. And even just sometimes drawing a monster of something that's driving you crazy is really powerful in crayon. So anyway, so I'm just babbling again, but I think that these are all the reasons why I believe in this as a way of processing difficult experiences in life.
It's amazing. I'm going to draw something after, because there's something that's bothering me and I'm going to do it.
There you go.
where would you like to see it go? Like when you sit and dream, like what would you like to see happen?
Well, that, I get asked that question a lot, and it's kind of hard because what's already happening is way beyond my wildest dreams. So I think that just the continued, I say in the menopause book that, one of the reasons for doing it is to inspire people to tell their stories, like to say, these are some stories, but there are so many more that I know I missed, and there's so many more out there. And I just was tagged in a mention on Twitter the other day that somebody read the book and then made their own comic, and that's thrilled me. That's, it's really about the individual, and knowing that it, again, like, I'm not working clinically as a nurse right now, and knowing that I'm still doing good in the world is important to me. And so knowing that that's happening. So that's where I'd love to see it go. Yeah. And I think just, again, what's happening already is just so beyond my wildest dreams when I started this. So just the more of the same, I think, is what I'm saying. Yeah. I was so surprised. I was teaching in a classroom about graphic medicine, generally an undergraduate English class. And this goes back to menopause. And the professor had uh, uh, assigned this book, The Menopause and Comic Treatment. And I thought, well, they're undergraduate students, like, they're not gonna, and they got it. So I zoomed into the classroom, and they were like really into it. They were really into learning about menopause, males, females, all, like, it was amazing to me. And I just loved it, thrilled me, because I just thought they'd be like, yeah, we don't want to talk about this, or like, oh, the colors were nice, or oh, the comics were interesting. But I think the fact that the book, opened up a world to them in an interesting and creative way was like, a lot of them were like, oh my God, I'm going to talk to my mom about this. I see what she's going through, and I hadn't thought about it that way before, or whatever. Like, the students really resonated with it. And I think also, like, a lot of the student people now are just so much more thoughtful and open about gender things. And I think that they saw that from another generation. That was a really interesting learning experience as well. So that was just such a thrill.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, those young kids, was in the mall 2 nights ago, and TikTok, I think, has done the same thing for younger kids, because a 19-year-old boy, like, I was working away at a coffee shop, and he came up and said, I've seen your TikToks. I've seen your TikToks on Meta. And he said, my mom's going through it, and she gets your newsletter, and I'm just so happy to see you. And like, you've made my day. And I almost like, I was like, what?
Yeah,
the openness, right? Like, it's completely different to anything we our age have experienced about the topic. Just to see, like, young kids be like, oh, okay, this is a thing. This is just a thing that you go
yeah,
through, and we're gonna know about it,
yeah,
rather than all the
yeah,
stuff that happens.
yeah.
I'm interested in,
Well,
because
that's just it.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say one more thing, is that that's just a part of it with putting the word menopause in the title of the book. One of the goals was just because comics have this long history of dispelling stigma, right? Just to get people to say the name. And when I talk about being excited that it was picked as one of the New York Times top, graphic, it's actually what it was picked as a top graphic novel, even though it's an anthology. Just that happening, and winning the Eisner Award, just that happening, got so many more people to literally say the word menopause than they ever would have before. And that's part of, like, what thrills me so much about it.
Yeah, and when you say the word menopause a lot, which I started a year, and it doesn't even mean anything. There's no, the more you talk about it yourself, you go from, I remember in the beginning, I was like, oh, and then all of a sudden now, I mean, and if anyone's uncomfortable, it's like, I don't know, you're just going to have to hear it more. Sorry, I forgot about the New York Times Award. Congratulations for that. Yeah, it did really well. I'm curious about, you mentioned therapy, you mentioned getting the stuff that's going on in here out. And there's a lot there's research about adverse childhood experiences and how those can contribute to a more difficult time in menopause. And there's no doubt that we're going through a big emotional adjustment. And for some people more than others. Some people did some of this stuff earlier because they were forced to. Some people are just confronting it now. I just wondered how you felt about that. You could maybe talk about some personal stuff, but the emotional side of it, what you go through, and now that you're on the other side.
Do you mean with menopause or COVID or the
Menopause, like
hybrid?
the emotional transformation that happens, that sometimes requires you to get the stuff that's in here, figure out how to deal with it, and maybe in a way you haven't done before.
Yeah. I think that stuff I'm not seeing as much on the page as I am in relationship, right? Like, the emotional stuff is is that I see, because it can sometimes come to the fore for me in terms of like conflict in a relationship. And in the past, and I don't know if this is part of just the getting older or whatever, but in the past it'd be like digging my heels in and the importance of being right, or the importance of like defending my position. And again, maybe this is another give a shit that's burned off. Like I just start laughing now. Like when, like if something really upsets me, or like the other day we were driving and my wife was like, "Oh, is anyone coming from that side?" And I was like, "No." Well, wait, well, maybe. And it's just like, I need to know I'm pulling out. Like, you can't have a maybe whether someone's coming and I need to pull out. And instead of getting mad and being all defensive, I just started laughing. I was like, great, that was the most ridiculous thing I just said, right? And I feel like on the other side of the emotional turmoil is like just the ability to be like, I don't need to defend myself. Like, I can just laugh. Like, you're right, that was a really funny thing, stupid and hilarious and like insane thing that I just did. Yeah.
Oh, that's a big relief. But those moments are a big relief, because that would have been a testy time before. Well,
Right.
so I have a reason for saying it or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Oh.
Right.
That's funny. What kinds of things are you drawing now?
Well, I'm trying to get back to during COVID, in the lockdown, I was teaching a lot by Zoom. So, and I had been traveling a ton before that and doing all this teaching. And I actually welcomed not having to go anywhere, but I also could like reach out in ways that I couldn't before. And so I was teaching a lot. I was curating COVID comics because there was this 10 years of graphic medicine happening. A lot of people were sharing their experiences, both educationally, personally, through comics, and they were showing up everywhere, like places that comics hadn't shown up before. And so my prior research around comics during the AIDS crisis is that a lot of them were lost to history because they just weren't archived, they weren't cataloged, they were just thrown away. And so I thought, well, wait, with that experience informed my saying, like, let's start archiving. So a colleague and I really worked hard on archiving COVID comics. And I'm saying all this to say, like, I had all this stuff that was just not doing my own work. And I'd finished the Menopause book. I'd had my own book was out there and doing well in the world. So I thought I could do all this stuff, but now I'm a couple years on really feeling like I want to get back to my own comics. And so I'm trying to, in terms of like, what am I doing now? I'm trying to start turning that kind of mechanism of energy and creativity back to my own work. And it's funny because I keep thinking it's very much like, I don't know if you've ever been a runner, right? And especially like a casual runner, not like, I'm not talking like racing, right? But like, the couch to 5K. Yeah. Yeah, that kind of runner. But the thing I've noticed is having done that is like every time you stop and don't do it for a while, you always have to go back to square one with that first day where you walk, run, right? And I'm finding that it's like that with this work too. It's like I have to go back, even though I've got, 2 books in the world, I've published comics in all kinds of different areas. When it comes to this, like I have to go back through the training from day one of like, all right, I'm going to draw some boxes and just draw. And also just the research process, because a lot of my books involve like research and interviews and all that stuff. And so I'm going back to that square one where I don't know what the shape and size of it is yet, but I know that the project wants to cover or help me answer these questions that I bring to comics. So I'm just getting back to that now and trying to clear the decks, right?
Okay. Yeah. It's hard. It's hard when you have a standard too, you think you should be here and then you have to go back here. It's always like that with running.
Yeah.
You could be putting it off for a year. I mean, I've been putting it off running for a long time.
Right.
What advice do you have for when, because I think creativity and exploring your creative side, how important do you think that is for women at this time? And what advice would you have for them and how to sort of start to explore that?
Yeah, I think, for every person is going to find a different outlet for that. I think it's just, I talk about having, and for caregivers, for anyone in any point, knowing what your toolbox is, start by just drawing it, draw your toolbox. And then what are your tools in your toolbox to help you when things get hard, right? And whether it's, what is your creative outlet? What is your sort of physical movement activity outlet? Like you could have your menopause toolbox, like draw that and then draw what's in it, right? So that you can kind of look like, oh yeah, because sometimes when we're under stress, we forget what's available to us, right? We think we have to live in the little like boxes that we suddenly find ourselves in, and we forget there's ways out. And so like just drawing your toolbox and and knowing for you what works.
Okay.
Right. So for me, I got to make sure I get at least 20 minutes of vigorous exercise a day. For me, I need to make sure that I draw every day in one form or another. Even if it's just doodling while I'm in a Zoom meeting, like get a crayon, bring in some color, whatever, just knowing what the things in your toolbox are. And that goes for eating and all that stuff, like just checking your boxes, drinking enough water, right? Like, so that would be my recommendation is know what works for you, figure out what works for you, and then make sure you sort of have some way of, drawing it, putting it on the wall in front of you, just reminding yourself when things get hard, what you know is in your own best interest.
Okay. I love that. Draw your own toolbox. Cause I always like write it in notes on my phone. And then when I get, I forget about it. So I'm going to, yeah, that's how you can start seeing. Does that make you feel good when you draw your toolbox of things to draw on when you're anxious? Like, there you go.
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
That's
Give it a
awesome.
try. And it doesn't hurt. It's going to help. Yeah.
And it's free, basically. You just need some.
Free.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, MK. It's great to catch up with you again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see what
It's great to talk to you. And thank you again for all the work you're doing. I've benefited from it greatly.
Thank you. Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Wish I could use my microphone, but oh well. I'm so.
Well, you always sound.
Sorry.
No, I was going to say you always sound great on the show, but I interrupted you.
Well, the sound can always be better, but what can you do? The one thing about COVID, I always was thinking about the podcast, but then I'm like the sound and all the ones I listen to, the sound so perfect. And then COVID happened and everyone, even the great people were doing like Zoom. And then I was like, I can do this. And that's how I can get people because before I'd be like, well, I'll have to fly to them. Like, I can't do that. I'll have to go to Canada and anyways, it's made a lot of things really accessible. It's pretty cool.
It really has. And the way that the Zoom app just puts the audio right there is so nice. Yeah.
Oh, I know. Yeah. It's a little too much screen time, but hey, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for always giving a shout out. And it's so great to touch base with you every now and then. And I loved the thing you did on the cannabis. That was just that made my day.
Oh, see, I want to do more fun things. I want to do more fun things like that. So
you whipped that up.
Great.
I was like, wow. That was fast.
It's so hard to know what's gonna and maybe I'll do one about trying this diet. That might be kind of fun, is to do a follow-up on your podcast with trying this diet. That would be a good comic to do, right?
Did you hear me? Did you hear me trying to scrunch can I eat some meat? Because I really like to eat. I don't like to eat much meat, but I don't understand why I can't just have 2 servings of meat a week. I feel like it's the only thing about vegans that I feel like they lose us, because it has to be, but he wasn't having it, was he?
No. Well, my wife and I stopped eating meat. She actually she watched this documentary and she was just like, okay, I can't do it anymore. And I was like, okay, great. because I had been a vegetarian in my 20s and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it again. This is great. So we stopped eating meat. But then I have a good friend who's a vegan, and then I listened to your episode and I'm like, oh man, yeah, it's just that extra mile of the eggs and the butter and the cheese, which seems not that much, but it's a lot, especially because my wife bakes so much. So I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to intersect with the, I don't practice Catholicism, but I was raised in the Catholic notion of Lent, and you give up something for Lent, right? And you prepare, but I sort of like the pagan roots of the spring preparation for spring rituals. So I'm going to try to at least start Lent is 40 days for the first 21. And then hopefully maybe I could do 40, and then we might be solidified by then and see if I could do it, keep moving forward. But it's really going to be about, are the hot flashes going to disappear? That's the bottom line to me. It's that's my metric. Will the hot flashes go away? Because that's what he promises, right?
Yeah. Have you ever tried the supplement Peak Noginol? Have I told you about that supplement, Peak Noginol?
I think someone that you hooked me up with, a company what's the name of that company that makes it? They sent me some, and I have it. I've just never taken it consistently because I didn't. Yeah.
It eliminated my hot flashes and I don't have them. And then I actually stopped taking it because I take you don't want to take too many supplements. So I was like, I wonder, they didn't come back. Now I'm super stressed this week. And I noticed I was having one. Just a little bit. Yeah. And I noticed I was very hot sleeping. And when I woke up, I was very hot, but I really recommend it. It's just, you won't find much on the internet about it because I don't know. It's not a big drug, it's not a big money.
Yeah, there's nobody going to make any money off of it. Yeah. Right.
Okay,
And tell me again the name of it.
I don't know how to say it. Pycnoggnol. And it's standardized, unlike a lot of supplements, it's made in France and it's standardized by a board, and it's like tested there too, in a way that maybe supplements wouldn't be tested here. It says a more rigorous process behind it. Yeah, it's
all right. I'll check it out.
It's the bark of a tree. It's made from the bark of a tree.
Okay. All right. I'll give it a try, but I can't try it at the same time because I don't want to confound my results, right?
Well, absolutely. This is tough. Okay, do the diet part. Yeah, let me know.
All right.
Okay, take care. Bye.
See you later. Thanks again.